We're in the Gemara on Masechet Rosh Hashanah on Daf Yud Chet Amud Bet. We have to review again, and we'll do Yud Tet Amud Aleph, and we'll see how far we get tonight. Our topic, as was the case last week, is the topic of Megillat Taanit and what happened to Megillat Taanit. I'm going to dedicate the shir Nishmat Moriva Rabbi Rav Aaron ben Yechiel, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha, Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein Zatzal, and we'll learn a little bit. We'll see how far we get, just to try to get some of the basic concepts down in a Gemara like this is important because it gives us certain pathways to understand maybe some aspects of our moment as well. I think we already learned last time, so it's really just Chazara. We talked about the fact that there was a scroll called the Megillat Taanit, that this scroll was written in the time of the Tanoim, that it was a list of days where fasting was prohibited, and in most cases, and Hesped was prohibited. There were some days that were actually only one and not the other that was prohibited, but for all intents and purposes, for our purposes for tonight, we'll just say it like that. Megillat Taanit couldn't fast on those days. And we saw last time that there's a machloket between Rav and Rabbi Chanina on one side, who maintained that it was somehow canceled. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi who say it was not canceled. It would seem at the time that we live that it was actually canceled, since we can't really point to any of those days today that we observe as happy days, except for Hanukkah and Purim. Purim, as the Gemara Megillah describes, has some kind of, call it, reference within the world of Mikra. We saw last time with Divrei Kabbalah. Divrei Kabbalah is like Divrei Deoraita. And Hanukkah was a bit more of a question. Just to remind you, there was a debate. Well, maybe it's because there's a mitzvah associated with it. The Gemara did not make clear what mitzvah that might be. And then Abaye had this memory where he said, so cancel it and it's mitzvah. No, we can't. You know why? Pirsumei Nisa. And because of Pirsumei Nisa, which sounds, by the by, not just like we're trying to publicize the miracle, but like the miracle itself became something that was publicized that people know about. So now how can we cancel that? And that's as far as Hanukkah is concerned. We also saw there was potentially a chiluk between the time when the Beit HaMikdash is standing versus not standing, and maybe the fault line of whether Megillat Taanit should be enforced or not enforced turns on the question of whether those happy days were somehow connected to the existence of the Beit HaMikdash. The way we got into this discussion was because of that pasuk in Sefer Zechariah that was being analyzed. It was being analyzed because they were trying to figure out when do the shluchim leave from the Beit in Yerushalayim to make sure that people in farther distances from Yerushalayim would know that the Kiddush HaChodesh happened on a given day. So the question came up, what is this pasuk doing there where it referred to all sorts of months of fast days? And it says, there'll be happy days. When are the happy days? Time of Simcha, they could be happy days, but at time of Gzeira, they would not be. The example used here is B'zman sheyesh shalom, B'zman she'ein shalom, right? There was a discussion with the fact that Tisha B'Av was in its own category because so many terrible things happened on that day. It was accepted from this idea of on again, off again. It was always a time that was still going to be observed. That was a discussion that we had. Anyway, when we got into this machloket, one of the things that we saw was the little story that at one point there was a gzeira made in Lud on Hanukkah. They wanted to enact a fast day, and Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua both engaged in activities that would not be consonant with a Taanit Tzibur. One got a haircut, one went to bathe, and they told the people, you will have to fast because of this fast day. You're not allowed to fast on Hanukkah because it's part of that time period of Megillat Taanit. So that was most of what we had seen. And the last piece that we saw was this holiday that was made by the Chachamim when they overcame whatever the Chashmonaim had put into place vis-a-vis the naming HaKadosh Baruch Hu in some way in each shtar that was being written. They took things to the opposite extreme. If the Greeks wanted to cancel the name of God, they wanted to include the name of God everywhere. But it was itself almost debasing the name of Hashem, because those shtarot that were not religious in nature, when the bill was paid, those documents would be thrown in the garbage. It would refer to Rabbi Yochanan Kohen Gadol El Elyon. And those words, El Elyon, of course, appear first in the Torah, we said last time, in Breshit and Parak Yod Daled, That's what Shem ben Noach, Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem, is saying. We're saying about him, he's a Kohen Elyon, and he's having conversation with Avram Avinu, and he uses that same expression. It appears, of course, in the Amidah, in the first bracha. Hakel HaGadol HaGibar Vanora, Kel Elyon. So those two words, Kel and Elyon, my Rabbi Liebtag, Linyane Tanakh, my Rabbi Linyane Tanakh was here just now, and he pointed out that Yosef Beseter Elyon, B'tzel Shakai Itlonan, it's a reference to Hashem. The name Elyon itself is one of the names of Hashem. It's not on a par with the Shemot Kodesh. Aleph Lamed is one of the Shemot Kodesh. One of the 7 names can never be erased. But the point was that the dating of every shtar using that expression was leading to a bad outcome. So the Chachamim canceled it, and there was a miracle, and then they made a holiday out of it. And what day was it canceled? On the 3rd day of Tishrei. So what was the miracle? So I think it was the Maharsha, says the miracle was that the king, even though it said the Kohen Gadol was Yochanan Kohen Gadol, the king was Yanai, Janius, and he tried to kill all the Chachamim. They were worried if he saw that they had canceled the dating in this way, that he would come for them. And he didn't. That was a miracle. That they didn't get killed, that was a miracle. Others disagree. They think, no, it said Yochanan Kohen Gadol because Yochanan Kohen Gadol was a Kohen Gadol, and there wasn't a king Yanai at that time. The name Yanai, just by the by, is actually a name that seems to be used almost like as a catch-all for the bad guy. The bad guy king was often called Yanai. There was a king, actual Janius, but that other people would take on, they would call the appellation also of other kings who did bad things, called them Yanai, even though it wasn't necessarily the case. Like after the first guy who was very corrupt. Another one holds that maybe it's another one of the, I think it was one of the Achronim, said that maybe the nace is that that the Chachamim saw that the people basically that the people, when they canceled it, accepted their word, and that was a nace. So they made a holiday of it on the 3rd of Tishrei. No one could fast. I don't remember now who. One of the Achronim pointed out that each of the Aseret Yemei Tshuva is as against one of the Aseret Hadibrot, and since it was the 3rd day of the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, was the 3rd day of the Aseret Hadibrot, don't take God's name in vain. So they made a tikkun about not taking God's name in vain. Davka on that day, 3rd of Tishrei, it became a holiday. Where we ended last time was we mentioned at the bottom here of 18b, right? So after this at the end of this story, the Gemara had said, "V'yisal kadaita batla Megillat Taanit kamaita batul achranaita mosifin." And so if you are of the opinion that they canceled Megillat Taanit, so that the early days got canceled. So now they were adding days afterward. If it was canceled, it's not because now they're going to add other days. They canceled all the happy days because the Churban happened. So hacham mayaskin b'zman shebim mikdash kayim. No, the point was the Beit Mikdash was still standing, right? And the fact that it was still standing meant that it still could have happy days enacted. So top of the next page, v'teipuklei the havale yom shenerag bo g'day ben achikam. Well, if that's the case, the Beit Mikdash is standing, then why is it a happy day? Because the 3rd of Tishrei is the day we observe as Tzom Gedalia. But when the Beit Mikdash is standing, second Beit Mikdash, it was not a fast day, it was a happy day. That was the pasuk from Sefer Zechariah we saw at the top of 18b. So the Gemara says maybe that's really what's going on. Amarav lo nitzrecha elaleser shlafanav. No, it's true the Beit Mikdash might have still been standing. Yes, you're right. Why was an additional holiday, so to speak, a day when you would be Asr Behesped of Taanit added on the 3rd of Tishrei? The answer is to prohibit fasting on the day before it, on the 2nd day of the month of Tishrei. So why is that? Well, why is that important, right? So isn't the 2nd day of Tishrei the day after Rosh Chodesh? Teipuk lei, the Havale Yom Shlach Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh being Rosh Hashanah. Yeah? Now, why do you use the expression Rosh Chodesh? There's a shaila if Rosh Chodesh has a stature of being a biblical holiday or a rabbinic holiday, right? Biblical holidays, the Torah says, is an Isser Malacha. Tells you that. It calls it a Mikra Kodesh. Rosh Chodesh never called that. We read in Torah, there's a Korban. Seder. So there's a Korban Tamid also. Every day a Korban Tamid doesn't make it a day that's a holiday. Understand? There's a general rule that the Yom Tovim or Yom Tovim that were Dirabanan, whether they're Hanukkah Purim or whether they're these days Megillat Ta'anit, they needed protection. They were on shakier ground. No one could point to a pasuk and say, the Torah says we have to do it.
It says more Yoraita.
Hold on. So when a holiday was the Rabbanan, so then it had the day before, the day after it was sort of like a zone. You weren't allowed to fast to protect the day in the middle. When it was a day de Oraita, it didn't. That day it was prohibited to fast and to mourn, but the day before and the day after you could. So therefore, that's why it doesn't say Rosh Hashanah; it says Rosh Chodesh. Because Rosh Hashanah is a day de Oraita. So the day before Rosh Hashanah, you could fast. In fact, many people have the minute to fast. The day after Rosh Hashanah, when it was once a 1 day Yom Tov, yeah? They only made it a 2 day Yom Tov later on, but it was a 1 day holiday before we got to Yuma Arichta being one long day over 2 days. So it was just a regular weekday. So if it was Rosh Chodesh, which it was, Rosh Hashanah is also Rosh Chodesh. If Rosh Chodesh is only a Derabanan day, then the day after Rosh Chodesh, you're also not allowed to fast. If Rosh Chodesh, however, is Deoraita, and that's the Gemara says next, right? Line 4 on page 19a. Rosh Chodesh Deoraita, U'Deoraita L'Bai Chizuk. It doesn't need Chizuk. So the Gemara ends up saying, no, Rosh Chodesh is a Deoraita day. There's no Isra Malacha. That's true. But we say Musaf, because it's a special Korban. So maybe that's enough to make it a biblical day. Therefore, the second day of Tishrei, maybe you would be able to fast. So by putting the third day of Tishrei, a day that was one of these new days of Megillat Ta'anit, so then the day before it, meaning 2 Tishrei, one would not be allowed to fast. The Tanya, Hayom Eila Haktuvim Megillat Ta'anit, Asurin Ben Lifneihem, Ben Lachareim, Shabbatot V'Yamim Tovim, Hem Asurim Lifneihem V'Achareim Mutarin. So that's we have this Breita that the days that are written in Megillat Ta'anit, the day before, the day after, not allowed to fast either. But on Shabbos and Yom Tov, the ones written in the Torah, you're prohibited on the day of, but before it and after it, you're permitted to grieve, permitted to fast. So my half-phrase bein zelazet. Halal, what's the difference between these and those? The ones, the Yom Tovim and Shabbos on one side versus the days the Rabban on the other. So halal divrei Torah, vein divrei Torah tzrichin chizuk. The holidays that are in the Torah, they don't need chizuk. They stand on their own authority. Halal divrei sofrim. Divrei Sofrim, Srichin Chizuk. The words of Megillat Ta'anit are Divrei Sofrim, they're Derabanan in nature. They need Chizuk. So the Gemara says, V'teipuklei, the Havala Yom Shalif Neyom, Shenerag, Yedai ben Achikam. Why don't you just say it's the day before, the day that Yedai ben Achikam was killed? Isn't that also, it's not in the Torah. Where's the story of Yedai ben Achikam being killed? We just learned it last Shabbos Shuvah. We went through it in longhand. It's in Sefer Yirmiyahu. That's where you find it, right? In Sefer Malachim Bet. And Yirmiyahu, it's the same story in 2 different places. So that's not in the Torah. So you should also say the day before, you're also not allowed to fast. So the Gemara says, Rav Ashi, Gedalia ben Achikam divrei Kabbalahu. Oh, if it's written in the Navi, that's called divrei Kabbalah. The divrei Kabbalah, divrei Torah, damu. Divrei Kabbalah are like divrei Torah, meaning you have the following gradations. Divrei Torah, that's in the 5 books of the Torah. Divrei Kabbalah, in the words of the Navi. Divrei Sofrim, something that comes later. Megillat Ta'anit is already Divrei Sofrim. But the day of something like Dai ben Achikam, it's in the Navi, that's Divrei Kabbalah, and Divrei Kabbalah are like Divrei Torah for this purpose. Therefore, it wouldn't have been enough to prevent prevent people from fasting on the second day of the new year, of the Tishrei, and therefore by putting another happy day on the 3rd of Tishrei, it enabled the day before it also to be without fasting. Mativ Rav Tuvi Bar Matna, Basrim v'Timnaya Bey, Atat Besurta Tafta Lihudoi, Idun Meoraita. There was good news that came to the Jewish people on the 28th day of the month. This month seems to be the month of Adar. They got a happy day. Something came to them that was positive. If you look at Rashi, he tells you, in case you haven't looked it up, that it's Be'adar Kad Megillat Ta'anit. Megillat Ta'anit, that's the month was mentioned. It's not mentioned here in the Gemara. But they got good news. Yeah? And that good news, D'lo Yidun min Oraita. Rashi, Shlo Yitztarchul and Natik Atzman min Torah. They have to separate themselves from the Torah. What's the backstory? Shegazra Amalchut Gezer Shlo Yaske Batorah, V'shlo Yimolad B'neihem, V'shiyechalu Shabbatot. So there was a Gezer that the empire made, The empire only means Rome. The empire, the Romans. They made a gzera. The Jews are not allowed to learn Torah. They can't do Brit Milah, and they have to violate Shabbos. Sounds very much like what happened in the holiday of Hanukkah. But apparently the gzerot came up at other times as well. Right? And if I could pause here and just mention, we don't have any record of great miracles that we made a Yom Tov out of from the later ones. It's like they were waiting for a big nace, like we'll beat them in a war, like it was what happened in with Greece. Didn't happen in this case. But they found a reason to make a Yom Tov from Megillat Taanit's perspective, and that's because of the following story about how they got out of it. Ma'asa Yehuda ben Shemua, one of the great Chachamim, Yehuda ben Shemua, what did he do? V'chavei and his comrades. There was a certain woman, a wise woman, a matron, who had all the dignitaries, the aristocracy, used to frequent her home. So they asked her, how could we get out of this? So Amr Lahem, she said to them, Bo v'hifginu b'layla. Make a hafgana. What's a hafgana? Rashi tells what a hafgana was in the olden days. It's not so different than today. Tza'aku b'shukim v'archavot. Go gain the pity, the favor of these people, of the Romans, the aristocracy. When you go in the street, in the marketplace, and you'd be screaming and making a ruckus about it. So halchuviv gina balayla amru, shamayim, klamar lamana kodesh baruch, for the sake of heaven, for the sake of the holy and blessed be He. Lo achechem anachnu. They said to the Romans, are we not your brothers? What are they referring to? How are the Jews and the Romans brothers in any way, shape, or form? Yaakov and Esav. B'diuk, Yaakov and Esav. So that's the tradition that the Romans are somehow related, that Edom is related somehow to the world of Esav. The nation Edom is the nation Rome, becomes Rome. Discussion how that comes to be, but okay. Do not have one mother. Yaakov and Esau had one father, one mother. So we should think about it. So Manishtaninu Mikol Umavaloshim goes into Gzerot. Why are we so different? Manishtana. Why do we have to be so different than all the other nations? That you are imposing various penalties specifically on us. Yeah? Gzerot Kashot, right? So Bitlum, they canceled it. V'oto Ayom Asuu Yom Tov. On that very day, they made it a Yom Tov. It was a holiday. So the Gemara now comes to its question. Why do we tell you this little story, this little maisa? V'yisal kadaita batla Megillat Taanit kamaita bittul sorry. V'yisal kadaita batla Megillat Taanit kamaita batla achranaita mosifin. If you think that Megillat Taanit was canceled, so the early holidays, the whole list, 30 to 40 days, all canceled. But then they added a day much later on in Jewish history. This day was much later in Jewish history. So and if you're going to pull out of the drawer, same answer you gave me on the last story about Gimel Tishrei, the Beis Hamikdash is still standing, let me disabuse you of that. Yehuda ben Shemua, Tamidosh Rabbi Meir. He's a Talmud of Rabbi Meir, right? So, and who's Rabbi Meir? He's a Talmud of Rabbi Kiva. Remember? The whole group. And Rabbi Kiva is already alive. There's no more Beit HaMikdash. Rabbi Meir is already the next door. Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua is even after that. Yehuda ben Shemua, sorry. Right? Elazar ben Shemua is someone else. So, right? Rabbi Meir, Batar Hachi Hava. Here's how we know that he came later. We know Rabbi Meir came later. Ditnan. Now there's a case that comes up. This is a case that has to do with the repair of an item that was made of glass. Objects are shayach l'tuma, but broken objects are not shayach l'tuma. Right? I was just talking now about the thing with Shiloh. When you go to Shiloh, which I've not been to, which our Leipzig was trying to convince me that I had been to, and when I was in yeshiva, he took us there for sure because he goes every year. I said the year I was there, I'm pretty positive I did not go. I don't know if I was sick or I don't know why. I missed that tiyul. Chaval. But we have the site of where the Mishkan was. We're pretty positive. And what's the main way that we know? The earthenware vessels become tmeim, because the earthenware vessels carried kochim kalim, kochim of the lighter variety, i.e. they could be eaten within line of sight of the Mishkan. So people would take with the family to sit around and eat it on the little hilltops all around. But then after the time elapsed that you're no longer to eat the korban, the clay cheres, the earthenware vessels, the cheapest material to make things out of, earthenware vessels, clay, because it was everywhere. That would now become tame irrevocably. Therefore, you couldn't use it for something else because it had now seeped into it the taste of kodesh, which now was notar because it was left over. So what'd you do? You break it. So they found broken pottery all over around the area of Shiloh, around meaning within line of sight where we think the Mishkan stood. So you just think about what that means. And there you have now the following question. The Tanan, as we learned. Where did we learn? Elsewhere. Yeah, the Tanya. It really should be the Tanya. Yeah, finds from a Sachet Shabbat. Klei zechuchit shenikvu v'hetiv l'tochan ever. There was a glass a vessel. It got a hole in it, meaning it was unusable. And then they dripped lead into that hole to plug it up. Now it's right because the metal would melt onto the glass. It wouldn't shatter; it would melt onto the glass, and it would create a seal wherever that hole was. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Yehuda ben Shmuel and Taanit. Mishum Rabbi Meir b'Chachamim Mitarim. Rabbi Yehuda ben Shmuel says it's going to be Taanit, right? And according to the Chachamim, it's now Tahor. So now go back to Rashi on Yotet Amud Aleph. Right? We missed some Rashis over here. Go back to Rabbi Meir Batar Churban Hava. 19a, right? Just 19a, one page, the page back. Not 18, 19a. Sorry, I just meant go back to Amud Aleph. 19 Amud Aleph, right? Dibur Matchil of Rabbi Meir, Batar Churban Hava, the first three lines on that next line, Batar Churban Hava. Kama Dorot. He lived after, Rabbi Meir lived a few generations after the Churban. Dehabi Mei, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Charav Habayit, Rabbi Eliezer Tamido, Haya, Rabbi Akiva Tamidos, Rabbi Eliezer, Kidamrina Bashili Abba Mitot, Rabbi Meir Tamidos, Rabbi Akiva, Kidamrina Beper Kama de Erevin, Kol Markum Sha'at Amotzi Mishum Rabbi Shmuel, Amar Tamid Achad, Lifnei Rabbi Akiva, Enu Ella, Rabbi Meir. Right, so Rabbi Meir is already the student of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the student of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is the student of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was alive at the time of the Churban. It's generation. 19a. Yeah. The Tanan Rabbi Yehuda ben Shmuel Talmidus Rabbi Meir Hava. He was actually his student. Plays Chod Shenikvu Shenitmu. They became impure. V'nikva Natar Nimtumatan. They put a hole in it. Dav could be Natara because now it was not a usable kli. They poked a hole in it. They poked a hole that it didn't shatter it, and they let it there. That's what it says. Nikvan. They made a hole. Aver Oferet Listomat Anekev. Right? So I don't know, they broke out the bottom and then they put lead to close the bottom. They didn't know about the lead poisoning in those days. So Yehuda ben Shmuel Matame, Lomar Shechazlu Tumatan Yeshana, Vav Bishlo Nagu Shuv Batuma, Vav Bishain Kli Zchuchit Chaznu Tumatan Yeshana, Kidama Parakama de Shabbat, Logazru Chazara Tuma Yeshana El Bichlei Matachot, Hananami Holva Aver Ma'amido Kikli Matachot Damu, the Koholech Achar Ma'amid. That bit of lead that was dribbled onto it is the linchpin of the whole kli. Without it, you don't have no kli because it completes it to make it a seaworthy vessel. Seaworthy, I mean that it could hold the liquid. You with me? It sealed it. The kli's chuchid, as soon as they made a hole in it, it was no longer a usable kli. So that's usually supposed to destroy its character of tuma. The machloket is if you reseal it up, does the old tuma come back or not? Generally, we say, right? We say that, by the way, this glass vessel did not touch tuma again when it became a vessel. That's what Rashi points out, right? And even though normally glassware does not go back to its tuma, right? Tuma yeshana. So in other words, you have glass, gets smashed partially. You go to the glass blower, and it crushes the whole thing, or she, and it becomes liquefied, and they blow a new vessel. It's the same glass that became fine granules that now was melted down, that now became a vessel. Tuma's gone. Metal, the in Klei Matachet, the Tuma Yeshana does come back. That's the halacha for metal. If you have something in glass where metal is what's sealing it up, So maybe Tumah Yeshana comes back. That's the machloket. Rabbi Yehuda ben Shmuel says, yeah, mitame. It comes back alive because what you used to seal it was metal. Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim say, no, it was a glass vessel. It has a little piece of metal on it. Okay, it's true, it's an important piece. But as soon as you had a glass and you broke it, the tumah does not come back. That's the rule about glass.
Since we just celebrated Pesach,
We did.
כלי זכוכית, אנחנו מתארים לפסח במים. You soak it for
So that's something else. That's something else. The soaking, right. That's only glassware that is only being used for cold. That's where you use what's called milui ve'irui. But glassware with hot, we do not kasher for Pesach by soaking it in the water. We don't put it in boiling water. It doesn't get kasher.
Agala doesn't work.
Agala doesn't work. It works with metal. Doesn't work with this. Matechet be'esh, if that matechet was used with direct esh. If the matechet was a pot that you cooked liquids in only, as opposed to a broiler pan, then you don't need the esh. You need the esh to boil up other water in it to expunge the taste. But a broiler pan, a barbecue grill, those kinds of things, yeah, you need direct esh to purge it from the esh that was being used when the chametz sticker thing was on it. Points well taken. According to Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, that's the next page. Matarin, they're matar this. Rashi at the top of the page of Yud Tet Amud Bet. The Ikaro Klei Zchuchitain. V'lo Azle Bater Hamamid. Right? Right? You're not gonna follow the mamid. Why not? Right? Because that's not the majority of the object. The majority of the object is glass. So that's what we'll go with. You follow? Does this make sense? Is everyone with me? Right? When it's going to be a full, they say the whole thing's made of glass. You happen to have a little bit of metal on it, big deal. The main thing that it is, right, is the zchuchit that's there. Yeah. So and then Rashi quotes here, right? If I'm understanding it here, in an acher, klei zechuchit tehorin shenikru v'hitilu tochan ever Yehuda ben Shamua metam'an tumat klei matachot deoraita im naga behen tuma deakol holech achra mamid. He holds that it's all about the mamid. Right? We saw before. Actually, it's probably Amud Aleph, really. Achra mamid. I think that's what. I'm not sure what that ayin aleph is, to be honest. Chachamim mitarim mitumat klei matachot deoraita. Right? The Chachamim matar mitumat klei matachot deoraita el mishum tumat klei zechuchit derabanan she'en klei matachot tamein deoraita el hamenuyin beparsha baparsha azahava kasav nechosh babarzel. So since zechuchit glass is not on the list, glass never becomes tamei deoraita. Therefore, if it was tamei, it would only be tamei derabanan. There we put a mamid. It's not going to be choser, even if the mamid was metal. That's what they hold. The Gemara says now tanoihi. It's a machloket among the tanoim. Yeah, what's that? Page 19b, top line. The Tanya hayima elu haktuvim megillat Tani bein bizman shebeit hamikdash kayim bein bizman she'ein hamikdash kayim asurin. Dear Rabbi Meir, right? So Rabbi Meir holds that it's not going to be canceled. Whether it's a Beit Mikdash, not a Beit Mikdash, it's not contingent on the Beit Mikdash's existence. There's a Megillat Tani. Now, it might have been canceled for other reasons, but not because there isn't a Beit Mikdash, not related. Rabbi Yosef Omer Bismach Ben Mikdash Kayim Asurin Mipnei Shesimcha Hi Lahem Ein Ben Mikdash Kayim Mutar Mipnei She'evel Hu Lahem. I mean, Rabbi Yossi disagrees. He thinks, of course, everything here is indexed to the Beit Mikdash. When there's a Beit Mikdash, you can have Simcha. So all these days could be happy days. We triumphed over this one, we won over that one, we accomplished this, accomplished that. But when there's no Beit Mikdash, all of those accomplishments ring hollow, becomes a source of avelot. V'hilchata batlu, v'hilchata lo batlu. The Gemara says here, the halacha is that it is canceled. And then it says, no, there's another halacha is that it's not canceled. Kashya hilchata hilchata. Well, how are we going to reconcile? The narration of the Gemara says, the halacha and the halacha, meaning, how are we going to reconcile one side and the other of this discussion, right? Is it canceled or is it not canceled? Which is it? Yeah, Gemara says lo kasha. Kan b'Chanukah Purim, kan b'Shar Yomei. This one is with Chanukah and Purim. It's not canceled, right? Sorry, the opposite. Right, it is canceled. Therefore, Chanukah and Purim is the only ones left. The other one says, in the other days, that maybe it wasn't. So it's really Lamaisa. We seem to hold that it's canceled. We don't know the calendar. If no one had told you 28 Adar is a special day, would you have been thinking about it? Not likely. I mean, we don't skip Tachanun on that day, right? Gimel Tishrei, it's moot. Gimel Tishrei is a fast day because there's no Beit HaMikdash. Does anybody say, but in the days of the Chashmonayim, they got rid of the shtarot that had Shem Hashem, therefore it's still going to be a holiday, right? You know why you're not going to fast the second day after Rosh Hashanah? The first day of Rosh Hashanah, because it's Rosh Hashanah. Different now. But it's just interesting. This is part of the discussion. This actually figures into some of the discussions that we have on the subject of making holidays, new holidays. Are we allowed to make new holidays? What would they look like? The greatest cautionary tale is in the Navi that Yeravim ben Nevat decided to make a new Yom Tov on the 8th month of the year. In the month of Mar Cheshvan, he made a Yom Tov, some kind of like a false sukkos. So that's not allowed. That's basically some kind of basically a Baal Tosif. The Torah says in Sefer Dvarim, Perek Daled, Lo Tosif V'Ta Yisrael, Ishma Lachukim V'Mishpatim V'Chulei, you're going to the land of Israel, right? And it says, Lo Tosif Al Davar, don't add. You're not allowed to add. Can't take away. So what's going to be? And the Ramban indeed writes, you can't put 5 parshas. And the Tefillin quotes Rashi, 5 parshas. And the Tefillin, extra minim in the Daled minim to make 5 minim, right? Don't take away, right? B'chulei. So it's just interesting. The Ramban, he says, even if you made a new mitzvah, let's say you made a new holiday in the 8th month, as Yerav ben Nevat did, that would not be allowed. It's just not allowed. Yeah. What about Mikra Megillah? So the Gemara describes there are 180 Nevi'im that came and went. That's some astronomical number, and we really say 48 and 7, but then we have this other number. Maybe it was over 200. And guess what? They didn't make any Yom Tov except for Chanukah, except for Purim. Chanukah didn't come around yet, except for Purim. And they prove Purim based on the fact that there's a book, and the book is the Torah, and the Torah has allusions to a holiday. And they decided Chutz Mikra Megillah. Yeah. And they didn't add whatever was written in the Torah, even one letter, just Mikra Megillah, and then it has all the drashas from the Psukim. So the Ramban further along, I put it here on the screen for myself just to tell you about it. He points out that all of that is with regard to mitzvah min Torah. Zui mitzvah min Torah bilvad sheyeda shehem mishum hageder hazeh ve'ena pi HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Torah. The chiluk would have to be, you'd have to know the difference between, am I claiming this is in the Torah, or am I claiming altogether, it's not in the Torah, but Chachamim enacted it. What's a great example of that? Chanukah. Purim, they found a remez. Chanukah, there's no remez in the Mikra. It's Chassidish of Vortlach. They're beautiful, they're elegant, but it's not in the Gemara. The Gemara doesn't say, we should have Chanukah because the pasuk in the Torah. What's the pasuk? The Chachamim have the power to make new holidays, basically. Ve'echan Sivan, the Gemara in Masachet Shabbat asks, and an answer is from Lo Tasar. Doesn't say, there's a pasuk in the Torah that tells you about Chanukah, right? What would you have reached for? Balot Chad Nerot, right? You have the Megillat Starim of the Ran, quoted in the Ramban, who says there's a hint that after the 12 Nesiim inauguration of the Mishkan, what came next? Balot Chad Nerot for Aaron, and Shulchan Gadol Mishalahen, and the Ramban, quoting from the Ran, and Megillat Starim says, after there's no more korbanot even, there'll still be lighting of lights. Who will do it? Everybody in their house. They still have the menorah, the Chanukiah in their house, and the menorah, they're lighting the lights as against the lights like Aaron Cohen, Mamlachet Kohanim, Begoy Kadosh, yeah? And, but the Ramban, he's cautious. He says, you can't just add a day just like that. Obviously, figuring very heavily into the conversation is Masachet Megillah. On Daf Yadal, there's a big discussion there about, can you, what are you, what are you going to say? There have to be this kind of shira. So from Avdul L'Cherut, there's going to be a shira. So Mimavet L'Chaim Lo Kol Shekain. from death to life, all the more so. Right? That's one idea. The other idea is that we say what? We say the reading of the Megillah, that's going to be the Hallel. Remember? It's going to be the celebration of it. And another idea, by the way, till the Jewish people came into the land of Israel, they could say Shira anywhere. Once they got to Israel, only in Eretz Yisrael you could have Shira, but outside of Israel, impossible. You're not allowed. Again, there's more of a discussion. On Purim also, we were still Avdei Achashverosh. After Pesach, we're free, right? So Akate Avdei Achashverosh, Anan. You can't say it there, right? All the ideas, they're all in that Gemara. But you do learn a certain lesson here, yeah? It's in Eretz Yisrael. If it's something that's saving from death to life, right? There's all different ideas that may come into play that would warrant making another holiday. Also, what does the word holiday mean? Isser Malacha? Nobody's talking about Isser Malacha. Hanukkah's Isser Malacha in quotation marks twice, three times. Not literally an Isser Malacha. What is it? It's that while the candles are lit, the women shouldn't do Malacha. That's not an Isser Malacha in the same way that, Shavuot is an Isser Malacha, is Min HaTorah. In the Shilta, the Rav Achai Gaon, Rav Achai Gaon writes in the Shilta Chavav, having to do with Hanukkah, that the Jewish people are obligated to give thanks and praise and thanksgiving to Hashem when there's a miracle that happens to them. Learn from the words Halud Hashem Kol Goyim, Shabachu Kol Haumim, Ki Gavar Aleinu Chazdo. So on account of the fact that Gavar Aleinu Chazdo, Halud Hashem Kol Goyim. So what it means is Halud Hashem Kol Goyim, what God did for you, and all the more so that Gavar Aleinu Chazdo for the Jews. Of course, the nations should, but we of course have to say Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilam Chazdo. So the Shilta goes in that direction. The Netziv of Volozhin wrote in the Hemek She'ela, which is a commentary on the Mechilta, not so fast. That just means when a miracle happens to make a day that year, not that you institute a holiday every single year from that. It's a real halachic diun. Can you have a new holiday? Under what parameters? You can just stop make stuff up. Okay, and what are you doing on that day, right? So we have the pasuk in Bamidbar. The pasuk in Bamidbar, Uvayom simchatchem uvamoadechem v'roshei chodshechem. Right, and all these days, utkatem right, utkatem chatzatzot alolotechem al zivchei shalmechem v'ilachem lezikon lifnei elokechem ani Hashem elokechem. Beautiful pasuk. We learn a lot from here about shofar. And what do you have on Yom Simchatchem? What's Yom Simchatchem v'odechem? Says the Ibn Ezra, sheshavtem me'eretz oyev, onitzachtem ha'oyev haba alechem. V'kavatem Yom Simcha, ki yemei Purim v'shivat yemei Chizkiyah, Svar Mecherim Chanukah, Simcha. Right? So it's a beautiful idea. It was a celebration when you win a war. That's actually Yom Simchatchem is the end of a little parshiah talking about what? The Jewish people being called to war. If you win, thank Hashem. Make a holiday. Yeah? Yom Simcha, Moed. It's a big discussion. Most of it was theoretical until the arrival of Medinat Yisrael. It was a theoretical discussion, but going back and forth, clearing, and there's no Beis HaMikdash. And what a good turn actually happened in Jewish history. That was a positive. That was so positive that you're going to start skipping Tachanun and not saying a hesped and not being allowed to fast. What kind of a day is that? What good thing happened? The Churban Beis HaMikdash. We have some astronomical number of people. We don't know the number. The claim is between 2 and 3 million people killed in the time of Churban Bayit Sheni. I don't exactly understand fully, the demographics, how you could figure that out, but that's the claim. And all sorts of people who were carted off to Rome to become slaves, never heard from them again in most cases. So what do you make a little holiday, it was a little nice for Klal Yisrael, and nothing happened until. Now the Pri Chadash himself, he lived in the 17th century. He thinks that there's nothing to talk about. That Batla Megillah Taanit means you can never make a new day. It can't be anything at all till the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt. That's his view. He quotes the Maram al-Shakar, who holds otherwise, who holds that maybe there are some heterim, how you could do it, this and that. Anyway, the Chassam Sofer gets into it. There's a whole discussion. It's not only a shir per se on on Yom HaAtzmaut, but it's at least worthwhile to realize the Gemara that we're on is related to this discussion. It's related to this discussion. Yeah. Rav Meshulam Roth wrote the Shelet Shuvot Kol Mevaser. So he says, he writes this. I'll just read you what he wrote. Hine ein safek shayom ahu hey iyar shenikba idei hamemshala v'chavrei hakneset shehem nivcherei rov hatzibur. So there's no doubt that the day of the 5th of Iyar that was established by the government and by the people who are in the Knesset who were chosen by most of the people, v'rov gedolei harabanim, most of the Gedolim. That's what he writes. Lachugoto, he was in Eretz Yisrael himself. Lachugoto b'chol haaretz, zecher l'neis shel tshuatenu v'cherutenu. To make it a day that's a remembrance of the miracle of our salvation and our freedom. Mitzvah la'asoto simcha v'yom tov v'lomar halal. Yeah? And he goes on to describe this idea, and he quotes from the name of Maram al-Shaker and all the different parameters. And of course, the Diyun still goes till today in the Olam HaTorah, right? It's still going in a certain way. 77 years in. 77 years in, we're still arguing. Was it a miracle? Was it not? I don't know. You know my answer, but there's obviously a lot of other people who have other ideas as well, also from the Olam HaTorah. So fine. But he actually writes this. He writes that obviously the biggest nace in the world. We had a nace of Hatzalah from Mavet L'Chaim. So, I mean, it seems pretty obvious that it's a pigeon me'avdut l'cherut shenigalnu mishibud malchiot v'nasenu b'nei chorin v'isagnu atzmut mamlachtit. We have now a government. Number two, we were saved from death. We were saved from our enemies. That literally sha'amdu aleinu l'chalotenu. Of course, it's Megi Yom Tov. Yeah. So, and he says he thinks they did right by choosing this date. How come? Because the date of He'iyar. Because it's the date of moving the Avdut L'Cherut. Because that was the day of the Hachrazah that there would be a Medina as such. And if not that, and we pushed another day, so we'd have to push off the holiday. We wouldn't get the sense of recognition and the agreement of all the different groups in the world that we would have a state. We had to choose that day. Remember, that was the day of the end of the coming to the end of the British Mandate. That was in the space. That's how they did it, right? And that nace brought about the second nace of the salvation itself in our war, and also the saving. V'chein hatzalat Yehudei Hagolah mi'arovim v'makom megureihem sha'alu le'Eretz Yisrael uba al yedei kach. Shlishi shel kibbutz galiot. These nisim are still playing out. They're not entirely done yet. They're all playing out. We're looking for, governmental independence without any dependency on the international world opinion. We're looking for to win the war, finally be saved completely from the Arab war against the Jews. 77 years, more than 77 years, 150 years. Right, because it goes from before the establishment of the state, and then some, and then the idea of kibbutz galio, which is still also playing out. So think a little bit as we're going into the day of tomorrow night already, Yom HaZikaron, thinking about the chayalim who gave their lives, thinking about people who died in piguim, of course, and what happened, Simchat Torah, Mechamet Simchat Torah. We're also thinking very much about going into Yom HaAtzmaut, the greatness of the time and the reality of the time in which we live, and the various ways in which we need to make sure that we're makir tov to Ribbon Shalom for the great bracha of Medinat Yisrael. Yeah. It's challenging. We have to do it. We have to do it. That's all we have time for tonight. Thanks for joining.
What time next week, Rabbi?
Next